They said, "Wait in the hospital lobby. We'll be quick." I waited 6 hours until a nurse finally brought me the news that the morning was ordinary enough to disguise the storm that was coming. I stood in my kitchen, pouring coffee into the same chipped mug I'd used for 20 years. The radio hummed low, some soft jazz station that never seemed to change. Outside, the maple tree I'd planted with Frank stretched across the window, its leaves twitching in the breeze like they were listening for something. Routine had become my anchor. Coffee at 8, garden at 9, letters sorted before lunch. I held to these rituals not because I feared forgetting, but because they proved I still remembered. Carl didn't see it that way. Neither did Jody. When they visited, their eyes went not to me, but to the clutter, to the stacks of envelopes on the hall table, to the dust on the mantel, to the drawer that didn't quite shut because I'd stuffed too many notebooks inside. "You keep too much," Jody had said the last time, flicking her manicured nails against a pile of coupons. "You don't need all this." I'd said nothing. I'd learned silence was easier when the alternative was her smirk. Carl wasn't cruel, not outright. He was distracted, overworked, or so he claimed. But lately his visits felt rehearsed, as if he was checking boxes. See Mom, ask about blood pressure, glance at fridge, remind her to drink more water. Then he was gone. I'd raised him in this very house, walked him to school, packed his lunches, cheered at his baseball games. But now, when he crossed the threshold, he looked like a man entering a place he didn't want to linger. That morning, I noticed the change in his voice on the phone. "We'll stop by tonight," he'd said, casual but clipped. "We need to talk." Talk. The most dangerous word in a family. I looked around my kitchen then, at the worn counters and faded curtains, and wondered what he'd point to this time. My pills lined neatly in their organizer? My handwriting on the grocery list? Or would it be the way I sometimes left the porch light on during the day? They thought these things meant weakness. I knew they meant vigilance. At noon, I stepped into the garden. The marigolds were leaning heavy with bloom, orange heads bowing toward the soil. I clipped a few and set them in a jar on the kitchen table, a small act of defiance, beauty for beauty's sake. The rest of the day passed in its slow rhythm. Dishes washed, mail sorted, tea brewed at 4. Yet unease trailed me, quiet but persistent. Something in Carl's tone had planted it. By the time dusk crept in and I heard their car pull into the driveway, I was ready. I smoothed my blouse, sat straight in my chair, and waited. The front door opened, footsteps crossed the threshold, and then Jody's voice, sharp and bright as glass. "Mom, we need to have a serious conversation." The storm had arrived. They didn't sit right away. That was the first sign. Usually Carl at least dropped into the armchair, loosened his tie, tried to look like the son who remembered how to be comfortable here. But tonight, he hovered near the doorway, shifting his weight, as if staying too long in the room might trap him. Jody, on the other hand, moved with certainty. She crossed to the table, lifted the jar of marigolds I'd clipped, and set them aside with a faint wrinkle of her nose. "These are messy," she said, brushing a stray petal from her sleeve. I watched her carefully. It was never about flowers or dust or misplaced coupons. It was about rewriting the stage. Each small correction said, "This isn't your house anymore. It's just the place you occupy until we decide otherwise." Carl finally sat, though he chose the edge of the sofa instead of his father's old chair. His hands clasped, unclasped. I could hear the tiny crack of his knuckles. "Mom," he started, then stopped. He glanced at Jody, who gave him a small nod, like a cue in a play. I folded my hands in my lap. "Say it plainly." Jody leaned forward, her voice soft but sharp. "We're worried about you." "Worried," I repeated. Carl jumped in, eager to soften it. "It's just, you've been forgetting things. The other week, you left the stove on after making tea, and Ruby said you didn't remember her soccer game was Saturday. I remembered perfectly. I hadn't gone because Jody hadn't invited me. I'm managing fine, I said. The house is standing. I'm standing. Jody smiled the kind of smile that isn't a smile at all. It's not about standing, it's about safety. We just want what's best. That phrase again, what's best. I'd heard it whispered behind closed doors, in doctors' offices, in courtrooms. It never meant best for me. Carl shifted again. We were thinking, maybe you should get a checkup. Just to be sure. Routine. Nothing dramatic. Routine, I said slowly. And you'll be the ones deciding if the results are dramatic or not. Jody's lips pressed thin. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I stood then, moving to the kitchen counter where the pill organizer sat. Each compartment filled, each lid snapped shut. Does this look like confusion to you? Every dose measured, every day accounted for. Neither spoke. The silence stretched until Carl muttered, It's just one appointment. Please. And there it was. The word he always used when he wanted something without saying what it cost me. Please. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The lines of worry etched deeper than his years, the way his shoulders curved under weight I hadn't placed there. For a fleeting second, I wondered if he even believed his own concern, or if he was just repeating Jody's lines. Finally, I nodded once. One appointment. But on my terms, Jody's smile returned, brittle and triumphant. Carl exhaled in relief. They thought they'd won a small battle. They didn't know I'd already marked the war. The morning after their visit, I moved slower than usual, not because of pain, though my knees had their own rhythm these days, but because of thought. The marigolds still sat on the counter where Jody had placed them, petals drooping as if ashamed of being banished. I put them back on the table deliberately, a small reclaiming. The house felt different after they left. Rooms carried echoes of their voices, especially Jody's sharpness cutting through the quiet. I tried to sweep it away with chores, folded laundry, scrubbed the sink, dusted the frames in the hallway. Yet the unease clung, like smoke after a fire. At 10, I opened the filing cabinet in the study. The folders were there, neat and orderly, deeds, insurance, bank statements. My handwriting marked each tab. Proof of my life. Proof of my clarity. I lingered on the folder labeled House. Inside, the deed bore my name alone, paid in full years ago. That mattered. By noon, I felt steadier. I brewed tea, set out one of Frank's old mugs, and sat near the window, where the light fell strongest. I told myself this was just another test, another attempt to tighten control. They'd tried before, in smaller ways, cutting short my stories at gatherings, deciding holidays without asking if I'd come, whispering she's tired when I stepped out of the room. The appointment was different, though, an official stamp, a way to put their suspicions into paper. Once words became records, they were harder to erase. In the afternoon, Kay from next door knocked. She brought a basket of muffins, still warm. Just made too many, she said, though I knew she baked with me in mind. We sat together at the table, steam rising between us. She noticed my stiffness. Something's wrong. I hesitated. Then I told her, not everything, but enough. That Carl and Jody were pressing for a doctor's visit, that they spoke as though my house, my choices, were already slipping from my hands. Kay frowned, her eyes sharp despite her age. You're sounder than half the people I know. Don't let them write your story. Her words stayed with me long after she left. That evening, as I watered the plants by the porch, I saw Carl's car pass by. He didn't stop, but his face in the driver's window was tense, drawn. Watching? Checking? The unease returned, stronger. Inside, I wrote in my journal, they want to test me, but I will test them too. I will not be erased quietly. I closed the book and slid it under the mattress. It was a habit I hadn't used since Frank's days, when secrets were softer but still worth keeping. The house settled into silence as night fell. Yet I lay awake, hearing not the creak of old wood, but Jody's voice repeating, "It's about safety." I whispered into the dark, "Safety for whom?" And the silence answered back, "Not me." Sunday dinners used to be mine. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes whipped light as air, cobbler cooling on the counter. The table always set with linen napkins, even when Frank teased that no one cared. But lately, dinners belonged to Jody. Her house, her menu, her rules. That evening, I still went. Habit is hard to break, and Carl had called with that gentle pressure in his voice. "Come, Mom, it'll be good for everyone." Good for everyone usually meant good for him. Their dining room was spotless, polished to the point of sterility. No mismatched chairs, no stack of magazines by the window, no lived-in clutter. Just perfect surfaces and carefully chosen centerpieces. Tonight, it was a vase of lilies that smelled too strong, masking the roasted lamb. Ruby and Trent sat with their phones under the table, thumbs flicking in silence. Jody carved the meat with brisk efficiency, while Carl poured wine into glasses etched with their initials. When my plate was set in front of me, Jody's smile came thin. "We made something easy for you. No bones, no spices too strong, as if I were a child." I ate politely, though every bite tasted like a test. Conversation drifted around me. Ruby's grades, Carl's long hours, Jody's new committee at the clinic. My name wasn't spoken until dessert, when Jody placed a small slice of cake before me and folded her hands neatly. "Mom," she began, her tone rehearsed, "about your appointment Tuesday. Carl will drive you? We've arranged everything arranged?" The word landed heavy. I set down my fork. "I thought it was my appointment." Carl cleared his throat. "It is. But it's easier if we handle the details. Less for you to worry about. Less for me," I repeated. "Or less for you." The silence at the table thickened. Ruby looked up, startled, as though realizing for the first time that grown-ups fought in words sharper than knives. Jody didn't flinch. "It's a specialist, very thorough. They'll check memory, reflexes, general stability, standard protocol for your age." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Not concern, calculation. "I'll go," I said at last, keeping my voice steady. "But I choose what I sign. And I keep copies of every paper." For a flicker of a second, Jody's smile cracked. Carl jumped in quickly. "Of course, Mom. That's fine." Dinner ended soon after. They cleared plates swiftly, conversation dying in fragments. On the way out, Ruby hugged me briefly, whispering, "You're not sick, Grandma." Then she darted away before Jody could hear. In the car ride home, the streetlights blurred against the windshield. I carried Ruby's words like a secret amulet. "You're not sick." Back in my house, I opened the filing cabinet once more, pulled out the folder marked medical, and slid in a blank page. On it, I wrote in bold letters, "Tuesday. Watch everything. Trust nothing." Then I locked the drawer. The battle wasn't coming. It was already here. Tuesday dawned gray, the kind of sky that pressed low against rooftops, promising rain but holding back just long enough to keep you uneasy. I dressed carefully, pressed slacks, a pale blouse, the cardigan with pearl buttons. If they wanted me to look frail, I would not oblige them. Carl arrived 10 minutes early. He didn't come in, just honked once and waited in the car like a chauffeur on borrowed time. I locked the door behind me and slipped the key into my purse, the weight of it grounding me. This house was mine. Whatever happened today, I would return. The drive was mostly silent. Carl fiddled with the radio, landed on a news station, then switched it off. I watched the streets roll by, familiar houses giving way to the cold glass of the medical district. At the clinic, Jody was already waiting. Her coat was too white, too crisp, as if she wanted to look like staff instead of family. She kissed Carl's cheek, but only nodded at me. "Everything's arranged," she said briskly, handing over a clipboard of forms. I scanned the top page. Name, date of birth, insurance. Routine enough. but near the bottom, in smaller print, was a section labeled Authorized Representative. The line was already filled, in Carl's handwriting. I looked up slowly. I didn't write this. Carl shifted uncomfortably. It's just a precaution, Mom. In case something comes up. In case, I repeated, my voice steady. Jody leaned in, lowering her tone as though confiding. It's common practice. Don't overthink it. I set the clipboard down without signing. If it's common, then they won't mind me keeping my own copy. Her smile faltered. The nurse called my name, and I rose before they could argue further. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and lemon polish, sharp enough to sting. I followed the nurse into a small exam room, sterile and windowless. Tests came one after another. Blood pressure, balance, memory questions. I answered clearly, deliberately. The nurse's pen scratched across the chart, but her eyes softened once or twice, as if she saw what I saw, that none of this was about health. An hour passed. When I returned to the waiting area, Carl and Jody were gone. Only my purse sat on the chair, exactly where I'd left it. A receptionist glanced up from her desk. They said they'd be back soon. Asked you to wait in the lobby. So I sat. The minutes stretched. The lobby emptied as patients trickled out. Noon came and went. My stomach ached with hunger, but I refused the vending machine down the hall. At 3, even the receptionist left, muttering something about a late lunch. By the time the clock above the elevator struck 4, the lobby was nearly silent. Fluorescent lights hummed. Chairs stood vacant around me like a deserted theater. 6 hours had passed since they left me, and then a nurse appeared at the doorway, holding a thin envelope. Her eyes were wary, almost apologetic. "Mrs. Hemsworth," she said gently, "I need to explain what your family has arranged." My fingers tightened on the arms of the chair. The storm I had feared was finally breaking. The nurse's shoes squeaked faintly against the polished floor as she crossed to me. She didn't sit, just bent slightly, as though bracing herself. The envelope in her hand looked thin, but her grip was tight. "Your family," she began carefully, "brought paperwork earlier today. It's not medical. It's admission forms. Admission," I repeated, though I already knew. Her eyes flicked to mine. "For Greenvale Assisted Living. A nursing home outside town." The words rang like a gavel. I held out my hand. She hesitated, then gave me the envelope. Inside were neatly stacked forms, my name typed at the top of each. Some lines were filled in with Carl's handwriting, some with Jody's sharp script. My signature was missing, blank spaces waiting to trap me. But near the bottom of one page, in bold letters, effective upon discharge from St. Mary's Hospital. The hospital I was sitting in. I looked up. "They plan to leave me here and pick me up never." The nurse's face softened. "I shouldn't be showing you this. But you deserve to know." Heat rose in my chest, part fury, part betrayal. 6 hours in this lobby while they drove home, convinced their plan was sealed. They hadn't even stayed to see me react. Cowards. I closed the envelope carefully. "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady, though my hands trembled. "Does the doctor know?" She shook her head. "This was handled through administration." Quietly. "They assumed you'd sign without question. They assumed wrong." The nurse straightened, lowering her voice further. "You have rights, Mrs. Hemsworth. They can't force this without your consent. Not unless a court declares you incompetent, and you're clearly not." Her words steadied me like a hand on my shoulder. "Can I keep these?" I asked, lifting the envelope. She nodded once, firm. "Yes. But be careful. If they realize you've seen them, they'll push harder." When she left, I sat in silence, the envelope on my lap like a weight of proof. The fluorescent lights above buzzed. The clock ticked forward. Outside, evening shadows stretched long across the parking lot. For the first time all day, I felt sharper than the air around me. They thought they could lock me away, trade my home for convenience. my voice for silence. They thought the marigolds on my table, the notebooks in my drawer, the deeds in my cabinet meant nothing. But they'd left me waiting too long. 6 hours was enough to burn fear into resolve. I rose slowly, tucked the envelope into my purse, and walked out of the lobby without looking back. The night air hit me cold, but it was bracing, not bitter. As I stepped into the dark, I whispered to myself, "They've written me out. Now I'll write myself back in." The cab dropped me at the corner. I didn't ask Carl to drive me back. He hadn't offered, and I wouldn't have accepted if he had. The walk from the corner gave me time to breathe, time to steady my legs beneath the weight of the envelope pressing against my purse. Twilight stretched long across the houses. Windows glowed with dinner light, families gathering, laughter muffled through glass. My house stood at the end of the street, porch light still on from the night before. A small beacon, a warning. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and shut it firmly behind me. For a moment, I just stood in the hallway, inhaling the familiar smell of lemon polish and old wood. My house. Mine. At the kitchen table, I spread out the forms. Admission agreements, consent waivers, insurance transfers, each one a blueprint for my erasure. The lines for my signature waited like open graves. I read every word. My training as a teacher returned, red pen in hand, circling inconsistencies, marking margins. One form listed Carl as responsible party. Another had Jody as emergency contact and health proxy. Neither title had ever been given legally, yet the forms carried their handwriting, their certainty. I set my red pen down and whispered, "Not yet. Not ever." A knock startled me. Kay stood on the porch holding a covered dish. "You weren't at dinner, so I thought you might need this." She stepped inside, setting the casserole on the counter, and her eyes caught the papers scattered across the table. "What's all this?" I told her. "Not everything, but enough. The hospital wait, the forms, the plan my own family had hatched behind my back." Kay's face tightened as she listened, her hands gripping the back of a chair. "They think you're weak," she said, "but they don't know you." I smiled faintly. "They'll know soon." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "I have a friend, Nora. Used to work in administration at Greenvale. If those forms are already filed, she'll know. Do you want me to call her?" Hope flickered sharp and bright. "Yes, please." Kay nodded, pulling her phone from her pocket. As she spoke in hushed tones on the porch, I gathered the papers into neat stacks, clipped them together. Order was power, proof was survival. When Kay returned, her expression was grave. "Nora says your name's already in their system." "Pending transfer." My breath caught. "Pending. Not final?" "Not final." "You have time." But not much. I pressed a hand flat against the papers as if pinning them down. "Then we'll move faster." Kay placed her hand over mine. "You're not alone in this." For the first time that day, my chest loosened. Not peace, not yet, but the first thread of an alliance. As night deepened, I cleared the table, sliding the forms into a folder marked Defense. Then I set a kettle on the stove, letting the whistle fill the quiet house. They thought they'd locked me out of my life. They hadn't realized I still had the keys. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was still, the kind of quiet that pressed against your ears until your own heartbeat sounded too loud. I brewed coffee strong enough to carry me through decisions. Then I opened the folder labeled Defense and laid the papers out again. Sleep had sharpened my resolve. Each line I'd circled in red looked more sinister in the morning light. Pending transfer. Authorized representative. Consent on behalf of patient. Words meant to make me disappear while still breathing. By 7, I was dressed in my best coat. Navy wool with real buttons, the one Frank had insisted I buy for parent-teacher conferences. "First impressions matter," he'd said. Today, impressions mattered more than ever. Kay drove me downtown. Her hands gripped the wheel tighter than mine ever could. "We'll start with the lawyer," she said. Nora gave me a name, Charles Lindell. He's steady, knows elder law. The law office was tucked into a brick building that smelled faintly of dust and old paper. Charles was younger than I expected, maybe late 40s, with silver threading his beard. His handshake was firm, but his eyes held patience. He listened as I explained, spreading the forms across his desk like evidence in a trial. When I finished, he sat back, steepling his fingers. "They can't place you in a facility without your consent. Not legally, but if they convince a court you're incompetent, those forms could gain weight, especially if your son and daughter-in-law claim you agreed verbally." Which I did not. Of course not. But courts listen to documents first, witnesses second. Your advantage is you have both, these unsigned forms and anyone willing to testify you're capable. Kay spoke up. She's sharp as ever. "I'll say it under oath." Charles nodded. "Good. I'll draft a declaration for you, Mrs. Hemsworth. We'll also file a notice revoking any presumed medical proxy. Your son has no authority unless you give it, and you haven't relief pulsed through me, though it carried a shadow." "They'll be furious." "They'll be cornered," Charles corrected. "And people make mistakes when they're cornered. Let them." By the time we left, I held a packet of fresh papers in my purse, my defense in black ink and notarized seals. Proof that I wasn't invisible, not yet. Back home, I placed the new documents in my fireproof lockbox, beside the deed and Frank's old will. The house seemed to breathe easier with them tucked away, as if its walls understood protection had returned. That evening, Carl called. His voice was clipped, strained. "Mom, we noticed some forms missing from the hospital file. Did you take them?" I steadied my tone. "I don't sign what I don't understand." Silence stretched. Then, Jody's voice faintly in the background. "She knows." "Yes," I said clearly, letting the words land where they would. "I know." And I hung up. For the first time in weeks, I slept without waking to every creak of the house. Because now the war wasn't just theirs. It was mine too. They didn't wait long. By Thursday evening, their car was in my driveway, headlights slicing across the porch. I was in the kitchen pouring tea when the knock came, hard, insistent, not the knock of visitors but of owners demanding entry. I opened the door only halfway. Carl stood in front, jaw tight. Jody loomed just behind him, lips pressed in that thin line she called a smile. "Mom," Carl began, his tone brittle. "We need to talk." I stayed in the doorway. "So talk." He glanced over his shoulder at Jody, then back at me. "The paperwork. The nurse says you took it. That wasn't yours to—" "It had my name on it," I cut in. "My future, my consent. That makes it mine more than anyone's." Jody stepped forward, her perfume sharp, invasive. "You're being unreasonable. Those arrangements were for your safety. For your health, I raised my chin. Arrangements made without me are not for me. They're for you." Carl winced. "It's not like that." "Isn't it? Then why was my house listed as available asset in the admission forms? Why was your signature on lines that should have been mine?" The silence that followed was louder than shouting. Carl's eyes dropped to the porch boards. Jody's mouth twitched, caught between anger and calculation. "You've been confused lately," she said finally, each word deliberate. "It's not unusual at your age. We thought it best to prepare." I let out a low laugh, sharp as broken glass. "Prepared enough to erase me while I was still breathing." Jody's eyes flashed. "If you keep fighting us, you'll only make yourself look unstable. Do you want that on record?" Behind her, Carl muttered, "Jody," but his protest was half-hearted, already swallowed by her glare. I stepped back, opening the door wider, not in welcome, but in defiance. "Go on. Come inside. Look around. Does this look like the house of a woman losing her mind? Bills paid, meals cooked, notes in every drawer? Or would you rather check the lockbox, the one with the deed in my name alone? For the first time, Jody faltered. Her gaze flicked past me toward the hallway where the cabinet stood. Carl rubbed his temples. Mom, please. We're trying to avoid a scene. Oh, there will be a scene, I said softly. But not the one you're expecting. Their silence stretched until Jody grabbed Carl's arm. Let's go. This isn't the night they retreated down the steps, their shadows long in the headlights' glow. When the car pulled away, I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against the wood. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with fire. For years I'd swallowed their dismissals, their quiet exclusions, their polite attempts to shrink me. Tonight, I had looked them in the eye and refused to disappear. The war was no longer hidden in forms and whispers. It had walked right up to my door, and I had not stepped aside. The house hummed with silence after they left, the kind that settles into walls and floorboards like a warning. I made myself sit at the kitchen table, tea cooling in front of me, papers spread out once again. The forms from the hospital, the new declarations Charles had prepared. 2 versions of my life side by side, one written by them, one reclaimed by me. I traced my finger along the line where Carl had signed responsible party. The letters of his name were familiar, yet foreign. The boy who once pressed crayon drawings into my hand had grown into a man willing to sign me away. I didn't weep. The time for tears had passed. This called for strategy. I pulled out my journal, the one I'd begun hiding under the mattress. In careful block letters I wrote, Phase 1, exposure. Step 1, make copies, not just 1 or 2, but many. 1 set for Charles, 1 for Kay, 1 for Nora, 1 locked in my bank deposit box. Documents had a way of disappearing when others wanted them gone. I would not allow that. Step 2, witnesses. Kay had already offered her voice. Nora could confirm the admission forms in the system, but I needed more. Someone from inside the clinic, someone who had seen Jody's hand in this. My mind flicked back to the nurse who'd slipped me the envelope. Her eyes, the way they'd softened. She'd risked her job to give me the truth. Perhaps she'd risk a little more. Step 3, control the narrative. My family would try to spin this. She's paranoid. She's confused. I couldn't stop them from speaking, but I could gather louder truths. Dates, times, signatures, witnesses, a ledger of betrayal. I gathered the papers into 3 neat piles, clipped them, and slid each into a labeled envelope. The ritual steadied me. Order against chaos. At 10, the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Carl's voice crackled through the machine, tired and thin. Mom, please don't make this ugly. We want you safe. Call me back, I didn't. Instead, I wrote in my journal, their safety is not my safety. Their plan is not my future. Later that night, Kay slipped in through the back door with a flashlight and a stack of folders. Nora pulled these from the Greenvale system, she whispered. Inside were screenshots, intake notes, even a tentative move-in date for me. Next Thursday. My name typed in bold, a room number already assigned. My stomach tightened. They had packed me away before I even left my house. Kay's hand found mine. You're not going there. No, I said firmly. But they are going to wish they'd never tried. The kettle whistled, sharp and piercing. I poured 2 cups of tea, steady as stone. The battle wasn't coming. It had begun. The next morning I woke with clarity sharper than pain. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like prey waiting for the next blow. I had weapons now, paper, ink, witnesses. I called Charles first. His voice was calm, measured. Bring me everything you have. The copies, the screenshots. We'll file an injunction if they try to move you. And Mrs. Hemsworth, don't be alone with them if you can help it. The warning tightened my chest, but it also steadied me. I wasn't imagining the danger. It was real, and I was prepared to meet it. Kay drove me downtown again, the folders stacked neatly in my lap. In Charles's office, we laid them out like soldiers in formation. He examined each page with quiet intensity, occasionally making notes in the margin. "This is stronger than I expected," he admitted finally. "They left too many fingerprints. Carl's signature here, Jody's handwriting there. And these screenshots from the system, that's direct evidence of intent." I exhaled, a release I hadn't realized I was holding. "So I'm not crazy." Charles's eyes met mine. "Not even close. They counted on you being silent, not on you being thorough." By the time we left, I had a folder of my own, notarized affidavits, a drafted statement for court, and a protective document revoking all unauthorized proxies. My name in bold, my signature firm. At home, I placed the folder beside the lockbox and wrote across the cover, my voice. That evening, Nora came by. She was older than I remembered from Kay's stories, her gray hair tucked into a tidy bun, glasses perched low on her nose. She carried a small notebook. "I wrote everything down," she said, flipping it open. "Dates, times, the staff who entered your name. They'll need a witness who isn't family." I'll be that tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I clasped her hand. "You may have just saved me." "No," she said softly. "You saved yourself." I'm only shining a light. Later, as dusk spread across the yard, I sat on the porch with Kay and Nora, 3 women bound not by blood, but by choice. They laughed at small things, the taste of Kay's muffins, the way Nora's glasses kept slipping. But underneath was steel. I wasn't alone. When the porch light clicked on automatically, Kay leaned toward me. "What's next?" I looked out at the garden, the marigolds still glowing faintly in the last of the sun. "Next," I said, "we let them make their next move. And when they do, we'll be ready." The night deepened, crickets rising in chorus. Inside, my house stood firm, its windows lit, its walls humming with life. For the first time, I believed it. They couldn't erase me. Not when I had witnesses, not when I had proof, not when I had a voice that refused to go quiet. They didn't wait long to strike again. By Monday afternoon, a white envelope arrived by courier. No return address, just my name printed in stiff black letters. The man on the porch wouldn't meet my eyes. "They said it was urgent," he murmured before hurrying off. Inside, a formal notice. Immediate transfer to Greenvale Assisted Living scheduled for Wednesday at 9 a.m. Below it, Carl's signature as responsible party and Jody's in a neat clinical hand. Someone had even stapled a prepaid taxi voucher to the corner, like a cruel joke. I read it twice, then a third time. The old me might have panicked, packed a bag, waited for the inevitable. But that woman was gone. I picked up my phone and called Charles. "It's begun," I said. "Good," he replied, his voice even. "Bring me the letter. We'll serve them a response they won't expect." An hour later, Kay drove me to his office again. He scanned the notice, his lips tightening. "This is a violation of every revocation we filed last week. They're hoping to move you before the paperwork filters through." "Can they?" I asked. "Not legally," he said, "but they might try anyway." He pulled out a fresh document and began typing, the keys sharp and steady. "This is an emergency injunction. Once it's signed and stamped by a judge, any attempt to remove you becomes kidnapping. We'll also notify Greenvale directly. They'll refuse to admit you without your consent." By evening, the injunction was filed. Charles handed me a stamped copy. "Keep this with you at all times. If anyone shows up, show them this and call me immediately." At home, I pinned the document to my refrigerator door with a magnet shaped like a cat, a warning and a promise. That night, Kay and Nora came over again. We spread the papers across my kitchen table like a war map. "They won't stop now," Nora said, her voice low. "They'll try to paint you as unstable. They'll want witnesses on their side." "Then we'll be louder," I replied. Kay smiled grimly. I spoke to the nurse who tipped you off. She's scared but willing to testify. She says she overheard Jody making calls from the staff lounge. I felt a slow, quiet satisfaction settle in my bones. Each piece was sliding into place. Outside, a car slowed in front of the house, headlights lingering. We sat in silence until it drove on. "They're watching," Nora murmured. "Let them," I said. "Every time they circle, they show their hand." I stood, the injunction in my grip. They think they're moving me on Wednesday. But on Wednesday, they'll learn what it means to underestimate someone who's been patient too long. The three of us raised our teacups like a toast, not to victory yet, but to the moment before the storm breaks, the quiet where resolve hardens into action. Wednesday arrived heavy with gray skies. The air smelled of rain, though no drops had fallen yet. I dressed deliberately, pressed slacks, a pale blouse, my good shoes. Not because I planned to leave, but because I wanted them to see me standing strong when they came. At 8:45, the sound of tires on gravel. A taxi idled at the curb, its meter already running. Behind it, Carl's SUV, Jody in the passenger seat, her posture rigid even from a distance. The knock came sharp at 9. "Mom, it's time," Carl called. His voice carried forced calm, the tone of someone expecting obedience. I opened the door just enough to see his face. Jody stood behind him holding a clipboard like a weapon. "I'm not going anywhere," I said evenly. Jody thrust the clipboard forward. "You've been scheduled. The facility is ready. You can't stay here alone. It isn't safe." Without breaking eye contact, I reached to the fridge and pulled down the injunction, crisp and stamped. I held it between two fingers. "Read it." Out loud, Carl frowned, taking the paper. His lips moved, faltering on legal terms he didn't understand. By the time he reached any forced relocation constitutes unlawful restraint. His face had drained of color. "What is this?" he whispered. "Protection," I replied. "Filed with the court. Witnessed, notarized. You try to move me, you'll be explaining yourselves to the police." Jody snatched the paper from him, scanning it with growing fury. "You don't know what you've done," she hissed. "No, Jody," I said softly. "You don't know what I've done." Right on cue, Kay stepped out from the side of the house, phone in hand, already recording. Behind her, Nora stood firm, holding her notebook. "We heard everything," Nora said, "and if you doubt it, so will the court." Jody's mask cracked, fury sharpening her features. "This is harassment. You're manipulating her." I lifted my chin. "The only manipulation was signing my name off papers I never saw. You wanted me erased. Instead, you've made me undeniable." The taxi driver shifted uneasily. Should I cancel the ride?" "Yes," I said clearly, eyes still on Jody. "There will be no ride today." Or ever, Carl stepped back, torn between his wife's glare and the injunction in his hand. His voice dropped to a hoarse whisper. "Mom, why are you doing this?" I met his eyes. "Because I'm still alive, and I will not be buried while I breathe." The SUV doors slammed as they retreated, Jody's voice rising in frustrated curses that carried down the street. The taxi pulled away, leaving silence heavy as the sky. I closed the door, locked it, and pressed the injunction flat against the wood. My hands were steady. My heart was steady. The storm had broken, and I was still standing. I didn't wait for them to make the next move. Waiting was a luxury I'd spent for too long. Action felt cleaner, sharper, like turning a key in a lock you'd already tested. Charles agreed. The clinic needed to hear the truth where the truth mattered. Not whispered in living rooms, but announced in corridors where decisions were logged and signatures carried weight. Kay drove me in, Nora beside her, and Charles followed with a briefcase that looked like it contained armor. The clinic's glass doors reflected our faces. 3 determined women and a lawyer. I felt no tremor in my hands when I pushed the buzzer at reception. Only a firm purpose. They couldn't pretend it was private family drama when a lawyer walked into the lobby and asked for the medical director. "Dr. Langley is in surgery," the receptionist said, surprised by our confidence. "But I can page administrative services." An administrator arrived within minutes, a tall man whose badge read Director of Patient Services. He listened as Charles explained, calm and exact, handing over the binder of affidavits, the screenshots, the recorded clips. I watched his expression shift from professional neutrality to something more immediate, a concern edged with the realization that this was not an isolated complaint. "We have a formal complaint," Charles said plainly. "Mrs. Hemsworth alleges coercion, unauthorized forms filed on her behalf, and an attempt at involuntary relocation. We expect a full internal review and immediate suspension of any staff implicated until that review is complete." The words landed like a gavel. The administrator's pen hovered, then set to work. He asked questions with the sort of precise curiosity that gives people no room to hide. Names, dates, who had handled intake, who had signed what. Nora and Kay answered. The nurse who'd first slipped me the envelope, quiet, pale, and steady, was there too, eyes downcast but resolute. She confirmed she had seen calls, messages, and forms submitted that didn't match protocol. When the administrator glanced at me, I felt the air change. He spoke to me with a consideration I hadn't heard from my family in months. "Mrs. Hemsworth, you have the right to decline any transfer. We will flag your chart. We will seal your file from unauthorized access. We will notify law enforcement if there is any attempt to remove you." Relief should have flooded me, but what rose was sharper: vindication. I'd expected resistance. Instead, I found structure on my side. The clinic couldn't ignore a lawyer and recorded evidence. They couldn't pretend ignorance when their own staff spoke up. Later, as paperwork multiplied and phone lines hummed, I saw Jody arrive, stiff, furious, and watched her composure peel apart as administrators questioned her. She tried the practiced calm she wore like armor at home. Here, it cracked under the weight of procedures and witnesses. Her voice grew smaller with each cross-reference, each logged discrepancy. I left the clinic not with triumphal fanfare, but with the quiet that follows the settling of dust. The world had shifted a few degrees toward justice. I hadn't shattered her in a single blow. There were steps still to come. But I'd opened a breach she could not easily mend. Outside, Nora squeezed my hand. "You did it," she said. "No," I corrected softly, feeling more whole than I had in months. "We did it." The next morning, the phone rang before sunrise. I let it buzz 3 times before answering. It was Carl. His voice sounded hoarse, stripped of its usual calm. "Mom, it's all over the clinic. Jody's being investigated. People are saying she tampered with forms. Is it true?" I closed my eyes, steadying myself. "It's not gossip, Carl. It's fact. They have the paperwork, the witnesses, the calls." Silence stretched on the line. For once, he had no script ready. "She says you're ruining her career. That you're exaggerating." I felt the old tug, the reflex to shield him, to smooth the sharp edges of his life. But I'd trained myself against it. "Carl, your wife did more than exaggerate. She plotted to erase me. And you let her." He exhaled hard, like the weight of my words had landed. "I didn't know." "You signed the forms," I interrupted. "You knew enough." The line went dead quiet. Then he muttered something, half apology, half denial, and hung up. I didn't slam the phone down. I set it gently on the counter, as if ending one more chapter of pretense. By noon, the news had spread further than Carl's house. Kay called from her porch, whispering with barely contained energy. "It's in the staff bulletin. Jody's been put on leave pending investigation. People are talking about her in the cafeteria, like it's a scandal no one saw coming." Later, Nora arrived with a folded printout. "Look," she said, sliding it across the table. It was a memo. "Dr. Jody Hemsworth placed on temporary suspension, effective immediately. pending full review of alleged misconduct. The sight of her name, cold in official typeface, should have thrilled me. Instead, it left a strange ache. She had built her life on status and title. Now those letters, MD, were attached to disgrace. Kay watched me closely. "You're not second-guessing this, are you?" "No," I said firmly. "But I know what comes next. They'll circle tighter. Desperate people get reckless. As if to prove me right, the knock came that evening. Not Carl this time, Jody herself. No heels, no lipstick. Just a storm in human form." She didn't wait for an invitation. She pushed past me into the hallway, eyes red, hair loose. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she spat. "Yes," I replied calmly. "I've stopped you." Her laugh was ragged, bitter. "Stopped me? You've ruined Carl's family. You've destroyed everything. Do you think anyone's going to thank you when this is over?" I met her fury with stillness. "This isn't about thanks. It's about truth." She stepped closer, shaking with anger. "You won't win. I'll make sure of it." But her voice cracked at the edges. Her power was slipping, and she knew it. I opened the door wide, a gesture not of welcome but of dismissal. "Then go," I said quietly, "before you lose more than your job." She stared at me one long moment, then left, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The house settled into silence again. This time, the silence felt like mine. By Friday, the scandal was no longer confined to whispers in staff lounges. It had spilled into corridors, waiting rooms, even the town cafe where nurses gathered for coffee after shifts. Kay's phone buzzed nonstop. Every message was another thread pulled from Jody's reputation. She forged signatures. She pressured staff. She was building a case to place her own mother-in-law in Greenvale. The words traveled faster than I expected. They spread like wildfire because they carried the one thing gossip feeds on: shock. People believed Jody was ambitious, yes, maybe cold, but meticulous. To discover she was careless enough to leave fingerprints on every forged page, that was betrayal no one could excuse. I sat at my kitchen table, listening as Kay read the latest. "One of the junior doctors told me her patients are asking for reassignment. They don't want her near them." Nora arrived later with a clipping from the local paper. A small article on page 7, "Clinic doctor suspended amid allegations of document fraud." No names, but everyone in this town knew who it was. I traced the headline with my fingertip. The letters felt heavy, final. By evening, I had 3 voicemails waiting. The first from Carl, voice ragged. "Mom, please, can we talk? Jody's a mess. She hasn't eaten in 2 days. I don't know how to fix this." The second was from Jody herself, sharper. "You think you've won, but you've made enemies in every direction. Don't leave your house unlocked." The third was softer, almost broken. Ruby. "Grandma, I don't know what's happening, but I believe you. I want to see you. Please." That last one stayed with me long after the others faded. I baked that night. Banana bread, my ritual for moments that demanded grounding. The smell filled the house, steady and warm. When the bread cooled, I wrapped 2 slices in foil. One for me, one for Ruby if she came. At dawn, I walked to the porch with tea. Across the street, I spotted 2 nurses from the clinic whispering near their cars, glancing my way. Their eyes weren't pitying. They looked almost respectful. It hit me then. I was no longer the woman they dismissed as fragile. I was the woman who had faced down her own family and won ground. My story was traveling farther than I had planned. By afternoon, Charles called. His tone was brisk but satisfied. "The board is meeting Monday. With the evidence we submitted and staff testimony, her license may be suspended indefinitely. I'll keep you updated." I thanked him, voice steady. After I hung up, I set the phone on the counter and just stood there. The house felt different, lighter, as if the walls themselves recognized the shift. For years, I'd been shrinking, eroded by neglect and quiet cruelty. Now every room seemed to breathe with me. The battle wasn't finished, but the balance of power had turned, and for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was being heard. Ruby arrived on Saturday afternoon, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her hoodie too big, her face pale with questions she hadn't dared to ask at home. She hesitated at the gate until I waved her in. "Grandma," she said softly, almost afraid the word might break. "Come inside," I told her, and when she stepped through the door, I pressed the foil-wrapped slice of banana bread into her hand. "Eat first. Talking comes later." She smiled faintly, tearing a piece off with her fingers, chewing slowly like she was buying time. Finally, she asked, "Is it true? About Mom?" "Everyone at school's talking." I didn't flinch. "Yes. She forged papers to send me to Greenvale. She thought no one would notice." Ruby's shoulders slumped. "Dad says you're exaggerating." "That you hate her?" I leaned forward. "I don't hate her. But I won't let her decide when and how I stop living. That's not her choice, and it was never his." She picked at the crust, eyes glossy. "I don't know who to believe anymore." "Believe what you see," I said gently. "Do I look lost to you? Do I sound confused?" Ruby shook her head quickly. "No, you sound more sure than anyone." We sat in silence for a while, the kind that lets words settle. Then she whispered, "I heard her last week, on the phone with Aunt Michelle. She said, 'If this doesn't work, we'll have to push harder.'" The air in the room tightened, but I didn't let anger show. Instead, I reached for her hand. "Thank you for telling me." "That takes courage." Ruby's grip was small but fierce. "I don't want them to put you away. You're the only one who ever listens to me." Her words cracked something deep in me. Not grief, but a recognition of how history repeats. They had tried to erase me. They were already learning to ignore her. I promised, "As long as I'm here, you'll have someone who sees you." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all month. "I want to stay longer, but Mom's waiting. She's so angry. At everyone. At me, too." I brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Anger runs loud when guilt can't stay quiet." Remember that before she left, she pulled a folded paper from her backpack. A drawing, me at the kitchen table, stacks of papers around me, but my back straight, my face steady. Above it, she had written, "Still standing." I couldn't speak. I only hugged her, tighter than I'd dared in years. When she walked down the driveway, clutching the last bite of bread, I felt something shift inside me. This battle was bigger than wills and houses. It was about what legacy remained, and I refused to let silence be the inheritance. Monday morning, the clinic parking lot looked like a courthouse. Cars lined every space, reporters with small-town cameras loitered near the doors, and staff filed in with their badges clipped low, eyes darting. Inside, the conference room had been converted into a board hearing. A long oak table, 12 chairs, a row of observers along the wall. Charles guided me to a seat near the front. "You're not on trial," he reminded me quietly. "You're a witness." But my palms still tingled as I folded them on the table. Across from me sat Jody. She wore her white coat like armor, hair slicked back, lips colorless. Carl wasn't beside her this time. He sat behind, in the observer row, head bowed, fingers twisting his wedding ring. The board chair, a gray-haired physician named Dr. Patel, called the session to order. He read the charges in a voice stripped of drama but heavy with weight. Unauthorized documentation, coercion, falsification of patient records, conflict of interest. Each phrase fell like a stone into water. When it was my turn, I stood. My voice was steady, low but clear. I told them everything. Not just the forged forms, but the months of subtle erasure. The way my signature had been replaced by theirs. The way I'd been left in a hospital hall under the pretext of safety while my house was already being lined up like a prize. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke like a woman laying bricks, one by one, until a wall stood between me and the lies. Kay testified next, then Nora, then the nurse who had slipped me the envelope. She trembled, but did not break. Each testimony was another nail in the coffin Jody had built for herself. Jody tried to speak, but her lawyer's objections sounded weak, rehearsed. She said she'd acted out of concern. She called me confused, forgetful, paranoid. Dr. Patel stopped her with a raised hand. "We've seen the signed forms, Dr. Hemsworth. We've heard multiple witnesses. Concern does not require forged documents," Carl rose then, as if to speak, but his voice cracked. "I didn't stop her," he said quietly, "and I should have." The room went still. Even Jody turned toward him, eyes wide. The board deliberated only 15 minutes. When they returned, Dr. Patel's voice carried finality. "Effective immediately, Dr. Jody Hemsworth is terminated from this clinic and reported to the State Medical Board for further action." Jody's chair screeched as she stood. She didn't look at me. She walked out stiffly, the door closing behind her like a seal. I sat very still. I hadn't cheered. I hadn't smiled. But inside, something uncoiled, a quiet, fierce knowing that I had not only survived, but prevailed. Charles touched my elbow. "It's done." Outside, the sky had cleared. Sunlight spilled across the steps as we walked out. Kay squeezed my hand. "You're free," she whispered. For the first time in months, I believed her. Weeks passed, and the storm that had once consumed me quieted into a steady hum of ordinary days. The clinic moved on quickly, new staff, new routines. But Jody's name lingered in every corner like a ghost. Patients whispered about her downfall in waiting rooms. Colleagues mentioned her in half sentences before catching themselves. She had become a cautionary tale, and in this town, cautionary tales lasted longer than seasons. Carl never called again. Not after the hearing, not after his confession slipped from his lips in front of the board. Maybe shame kept him away. Maybe loyalty to Jody. Maybe both. For the first time in my life, I didn't ache for his absence. His silence no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space. Ruby came often. After school, she'd ride her bike over, a little out of breath, cheeks flushed. She always brought something small, a sketch, a cookie from the cafeteria. Once, even a pebble, she said, looked like a heart. We'd sit at the kitchen table, her telling me stories about teachers and friends, me listening like it was scripture. She was building her own voice, and I was determined she'd never be silenced as I once was. One evening, she asked, "Grandma, are you glad it happened? I mean, not what they did, but the way it ended?" I thought for a long time. The clock ticked. The marigolds in the yard had begun to bloom again, stubborn and bright. "I'm not glad it happened," I said finally. "But I'm glad I found out who I really am. And I'm glad you saw it too." She nodded, satisfied, as if she had been waiting for those words. The house felt different now, not haunted by plans to erase me, but alive again. I painted the hallway a soft cream, moved the heavy curtains aside to let more light in. I even planted basil in a clay pot by the kitchen window. Each morning, I watered it and whispered, "You belong here." So do I. One Saturday, Kay and Nora came for tea. We sat on the porch, the three of us, sipping slowly as the sun lowered. Nora teased that we should start a club, the Unbroken Women's Circle. Kay laughed until tears ran down her cheeks. For once, my laughter joined theirs easily, unburdened. That night, I opened my journal, the one I'd begun the day I decided to fight. The last entry was simple. They tried to silence me. I answered with truth, and truth stayed. I closed the journal, slid it into the lockbox with the documents that had once been my shield. They were history now, proof not only of what I'd survived, but of what I'd chosen. As I turned out the light, Ruby's drawing on the wall caught my eye. Still standing. Yes, still standing. And more than that. finally living.